also wrote down, whether on deerskin or whatever kind of thing they could write upon. Within 2 years of the death of Prophet Muhammad, the Quran as a whole was compiled into the form that we have in the book form. But the Quran as it's been spoken, as it comes out of the mouth, which is the real Quran, this has been transmitted faithfully from many to many to many. So that is, a person has a teacher in 2012, he's learning the Quran, his teacher learned from someone, from his teacher, who learned from his teacher, who learned from his teacher, who learned from his teacher, and there are people who actually keep track of that chain, and who learned from his teacher, learned from a companion, to a companion of the Prophet Muhammad, who learned from a companion of Prophet Muhammad, who learned from the Prophet Muhammad himself. And that's, I think, a pretty amazing, even just from just a non-religious perspective, just thinking about human beings doing that through time till today. So at first, of course, it was many to many, and then it became thousands to thousands and hundreds of thousands. Now it's millions to millions, right? So this is why Muslims have so much confidence in the Quran. It's not just this dogmatic thing that, oh, the Quran is right and it hasn't been changed. There's actually something behind that. There is some reality that is there, and when you look at it from a historical, literary criticism perspective. So I just wanted to make that point. The summary of his life, we'll save that for next week. And then the essence, this is also important, is not just a mailman. He actually lived in a way that is described in the Quran, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, which means you have a sublime character. So he was, one of his most important qualities, of course, he was a very humble person. He himself was not seeking to be the messenger. I mean, it's a big burden, right? He was actually quite in a state of shock when he began to receive the first revelations. And even when he reached the greatest heights, he still remained a very simple person. When he died, he had no property except for some land which he donated for people who are traveling, to use that land so that they can be accommodated. He had maybe like a mule left behind, but he could have had whatever he wanted. And his companions told him that, actually. They said, why don't you do like the kings of Persia and this one? Why don't you do? He said, I'm not like them. He said, how do you like that they have all these things in this life, but we will have it in the next life, right? So he is, in other reports, he was given the offer, do you want to be a king prophet, like Solomon, peace be upon him, or do you want to be a slave prophet? So he said, I'd rather be a slave prophet. He is also known for his compassion to all creatures, especially towards the weak and the oppressed and so on, to those who are not noticed. And there's actually a reason behind that, besides that God is telling him to do that. But he himself was one of those. He is an orphan, right? So some of this will come out, I think, in next week's topic. The reason why I put this last bullet, just to make it clear, as Muslims, we do not worship Muhammad. This is why some Muslims in the past, they found the Orientalists, which are people who were studying the Muslim world back in the colonial days. Many people say to help the colonialists dominate the places where they're going. But they were calling the Muslims Muhammadans, right? And a lot of Muslims actually found that a little bit offensive because it was implying that they worship Muhammad, which we don't, right? We worship God, right? And we follow the example shown to us by this, human being. So he is not divine, but yet he is considered to be the best role model for human beings to follow. In addition to the examples of the previous prophets before, because at the end of the day, they're all brothers anyhow. Rasul. But any questions about this? Yes? Yeah, that's a common question. We do believe that Muhammad is sinless, but he did make documented errors in judgment where he wasn't receiving inspiration from God. So one of them is in the Quran itself, which Muslims use to prove that the Quran is not from Prophet Muhammad. Because if it was from Prophet Muhammad, why would he criticize himself? Right? So, and that's, let me run over here. So that is surah number, or chapter number, chapter number 80. And it says that he frowned and he turned away. What this has to do was an incident at the very beginning of the message. So Prophet Muhammad understood finally that his mission was to deliver this message to everybody. And he was very hopeful. And he put his full enthusiasm. And what he judged is that if he can get the chiefs to become Muslim, then everybody else would follow along. So in this particular episode, that was just a judgment that he made. He was talking to some of the big chiefs of that city, Mecca. And while he was arguing with them or talking to them, there was a blind man who was Muslim who came and he wanted to ask the Prophet a question. So even though the blind man couldn't see, but just that slight thing, that Prophet Muhammad, he felt annoyed or he frowned, right? So Allah actually said, no, you should not have given so much attention to the chiefs. You should give attention to the one who is actually coming to you, not to the one who is arrogant and proud and is trying to, is not accepting, right? So that would be an example not of a sin, but of an error which God corrects so that he understands. So there's another example of something earthly. In the city of Medina, which he went to, they're agriculturalists. And they used to plant their date palms a particular way. So Prophet Muhammad said, I don't see why you do that. Like, they were doing a particular step. I don't know the detail of it. But they said, I don't see you have to do that. He was just making a human statement. Right? And then they didn't do it. Then the next year they had a bad crop. And the Prophet Muhammad said, they came and said, what happened? They said, you know about your affairs more than me. And so, but definitely never any sort of major, deliberate, malicious kind of sinfulness, anything like that. For any prophet, in fact, for that we believe as Muslims. All right. Any other questions? We're going to wrap up here. The word for messenger we use is Rasul. This is his most common, frequently used title is Rasulullah, which means messenger of God. Obviously, to deliver the message faithfully, which he did. Whatever came to him, verbatim, whatever God had him say, he said. Without any fear of reproach from anybody. He just said what he had to say from God. But also to live the message. His wife others asked him, what was his character like? They say, don't you know the Quran? They say, yeah, we read the Quran. They said, Prophet Muhammad was like a walking Quran. That was who, right? So Quran, for example, enjoins patience, enjoins forgiveness, enjoins all those things, those beautiful characters, values. They said Prophet Muhammad was basically that. He was living Quran. The reason why I put this, the choice of Allah, that it's not the choice of men. And that is actually one of the tests. We said that God tests people. One of the tests was if it's a choice other than who you would have chosen. So let's say, for example, some of the competing Arab tribes. They said, well, how come he wasn't chosen from our tribe? And then, of course, at the bigger tribal level, some of the Jews in Medina, they were like, okay, he's meeting a lot of the right things for a prophet, but he's an Ishmaelite. He's not an Israelite. Right? Others are saying, oh, but he's not from this, he's not from that. But God knows how to choose and who he chooses. And actually, he deliberately chose one who, I'm not going to say was at the bottom rung, but he wasn't at one of the elites, right? He was someone who was, again, an orphan, had a career as a shepherd, which nobody really was paying too much attention to, and was kind of eventually developed into a merchant who was just minding his own business, kind of aloof. But God chose him to give that message, and then after that, not to be cliche, but the rest is history, right? The last word in the Shahada, in the testimony of faith, it started with I testify, and it ends with